Today on Project 380 I'm going to be doing a little bit of work to the diff. So the subframe's already out of the car for a couple of reasons. Number one, I wanted to get rid of all the rust. Number two, I wanted to paint everything on the chassis at the rear end. And number three, I made a little mistake with this subframe years ago and I've now got to change it out. But I won't go into details on that. All you need to know is I'm putting a new one in. So while this is all out and I'm renewing a lot of stuff connected to the subframe, I'm going to do a little bit of work to my diff. So I want to work on getting my diff out of the rear subframe, and the first thing to do is to drain the oil out of the diff. So at the back of the diff you've got the drain bung, the level bung, and up the top is a breather filter. So we only want to undo the drain bung. This is a 24 on this model, it may be different on others. Now I wouldn't usually use an impact gun, but I've just got it resting on a jack, and if I used a lever bar I'd probably drop it. Now that it's all drained, I'm going to put the drain bung back in for safekeeping. So to be able to remove the diff we need to get the drive shafts out of the diff, and to do that a few components are going to have to come off first. So I'm going to start off with my overly large wheel spacers. I'm also going to take off the suspension as that's going to go onto the new subframe. I'm going to take off the brake calipers and undo the top arm bolt. So this side is exactly the same as the other side, but on this side I'm going to talk you through what I'd do if this was still on the car. First thing I would do is remove the wheel and then remove the brake caliper, and to do that all you want to do is take out the slider pin at the bottom. Now what you'd usually do is pivot the brake caliper up from the bottom and slide it out of the way, but this has been seized and stuck for the last 5 or 6 years. So I'm going to coat everything in WD-40 as I'm not going to be using these brake calipers anymore or the discs and pads. If you were going to use the discs and pads again, don't use WD-40 as they'll impregnate into the pads and be absolutely useless. So when that's movable, swing it up and slide it off the top slider. Usually what I'll do now is hook it out of the way with a tie wrap or a metal hook so it's not in our way, and then remove the bolt joining the top arm to the hub. And then pry away the hub from the top arm and pop the nut and bolt back in so you don't lose it. Now for the drive shaft or hub nut. I'm doing it at this stage because I've got an impact gun. If you haven't got an impact gun, make this your first job after taking the wheel off. so the handbrake is still on. But the MX5 handbrake is notoriously rubbish, so more than likely it's not going to come undone with a breaker bar, and you are going to have to use an impact gun. Now is a good time, if you have the standard bushings in the lower arm, just to undo the main bolt that connects the lower arm to the hub ever so slightly to allow the hub to swing down a little easier. But now it's time to remove the drive shaft from the hub, and to do that I'm going to use a hub puller which connects to the wheel studs and pushes the drive shaft through the hub. If you haven't got one of these, it's probably a good idea to borrow one or buy one, as you don't want to hit the drive shaft to get it out, as it will mushroom the end, destroy the threads, and it will be completely unusable. So to use the hub puller, you put it on the wheel studs and then using your wheel bolts, but I've lost my wheel bolts somehow, so I'm just going to use a standard nut. Just slightly tighten the hub puller down. Now using a spanner or ratchet, or in my case an impact gun, we're going to wind this thread in, pushing the drive shaft through the hub. Now it's a good idea to put the hub nut back onto the drive shaft so you don't risk any damage to the thread. Now, as if you were looking underneath the car, it's time to remove the drive shafts from the diff. And to do that, you simply take 2 lever bars or 2 screwdrivers, wedge them in between the drive shaft and the diff, and pop them out. Now to remove the diff from the subframe, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the diff stop washer bushes, and they are just held in to the subframe with 2 10mm nuts down here. Now give these a good soaking, as they do like to snap, as they are a stud coming off of the subframe. And then remove the main diff nut. Once that's all undone, you can remove the diff stop washer. Usually you'd be doing this job with the subframe and diff still on the car. So before removing those last 6 nuts, make sure you've got the diff supported with a trolley jack. But once those nuts are out of the way, just lower the trolley jack down and remove the diff. All I've got to do in my case is lift the diff out of the subframe. So the whole point of stripping the subframe and splitting the diff apart was to do a little bit of work to the rear diff housing. Now I'm actually going to be doing a little bit of welding to it, which means I'm going to have to remove the seals and the diff bushings and any other bungs and breathers. So I'm going to start off with the diff bushings. As you can see, mine are orange, so they are a polyurethane bush. I'm going to remove these. These are a little bit easier to remove than the standard bushings, but these have been in for years. Hopefully I'll be able to just knock the centre out and then prise the 2 halves of the polyurethane away. So these diff bushers have been in this diff for the past 5 years, and no matter what it is, whether it's a bush or a nut and bolt, it just goes to prove if you use the right lubricant, nothing will seize. Now to take out the diff side seals as well. It's a good idea to replace these anytime you take out the drive shaft or take out the diff. For the price of them, they're pretty cheap to change and not worth thinking about. When you're doing this, just make sure you're not going to scratch the metal in a race. However, I am going to cheat a little bit because I have got the diff split in half. I'm going to hit it from the inside out. But the last things left to remove is the drain, the level or filter spill bump, and the pressure relief valve. Now that everything is off that I could possibly remove, it's time to give this a really good clean. So I've cleaned the diff as much as I can, and as you can see I've only cleaned the top half where the arms are, and that's for a very good reason. These rear MX5 diff housings have got a very common problem, and that is where they shear completely on the right hand side of the diff housing. That isn't actually a problem, that is doing what it's designed to do. The rear housings are designed to shear off on the right hand side to prevent anything else breaking. So as you can see on the right hand side, there is 2 notches cut out on the arm, but not on the left hand side. So it's always going to break on the right hand side. Now this isn't a problem if you're running standard power, you're probably not going to break it, unless you clip a curb or hit a wall. But when you're aiming to put as much power in it as I am, you are going to have to strengthen the rear diff housing or change the diff. But because I am going to be running a lot more power, hopefully, I am going to have to strengthen this diff. So what I'm going to do is weld in aluminium plates all along here and here to try and stop the diff housing breaking. Unfortunately, because I am going to be strengthening the diff, so hopefully it won't break, that does mean I've got the potential to break something else. But when and if that item breaks, I will replace it, if not upgrade it. I would advise anyone who's going to be doing a bit of drifting or some drag racing to weld in the strengthening plates to the rear diff housing, as it's going to benefit you when you're clutch kicking or doing an aggressive launch, as this is where the diff is more likely to twist under load, and then this is where these notches come into play and the right hand side of the diff housing snaps. So what I'm going to do first is cut off these raised lugs both sides. Then I'm going to make a template of what bit I would need to strengthen out of cardboard, transfer that template to a nice thick sheet of aluminium and weld it all up. diff housing fully welded. It wasn't the easiest to weld up, as the aluminium it's made out of is full of contaminants and it kept contaminating the weld. So these are by no means Instagram worthy welds, but they're strong enough and they should do the job that they're intended to do. I have also gone completely overkill. I really only needed to weld up this side, but in my mind I was thinking if I made this side strong, surely this side is going to break next. So you may have seen in the front I've drilled a couple of holes, and at the back I've ran a grinder the length of the diff housing, and I've left a little bit of weld either side. That is to allow the air to escape. Because all these voids inside would have been a sealed space, you need somewhere for that hot air to escape. And because it's going to be powder coated and that requires it to be heated up to about 200 degrees, I needed somewhere for that air to escape. If not, these could bow or even explode. So now I'm going to send this off to the powder coaters, and I don't really know how long that's going to take because of the current climate. So join me next time where hopefully I'll be putting this back onto the diff and into the car. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Off to the powder coaters.